What an incredible blessing from God. We love him, we honor him, we celebrate him, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. I'm glad that you're here just to worship him today in spirit and in truth. And I pray that your hearts will be incredibly blessed. We'd be blessed if we went home right now. But I'm glad that you're here. You may be seated in his presence. So wonderful to be able to see you here in the house of the Lord today. We just bless God for his goodness to us, for the strength that he brings into our life day by day. You ever know that sometimes you go through situations where you need to just ask God, Lord, give me strength? You ever been there? But I'm really glad to know that his strength is made perfect in our weakness, in our shortcomings, in the fallibility that we have as human beings, that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And we honor the King of Kings and Lord of Lords for who he is and for what he does in us, and we just give him glory and honor and celebrate him. One of you would turn your attention to 2 Kings chapter 2. 2 Kings chapter 2. 2 Kings chapter 2. Beginning with verse 19 through verse 22. You notice the word of the Lord. Then the men of the city said to Elisha, please notice the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad, and the ground barren. And he said, bring me a new bowl and put salt in it. So they brought it to him. And then he went out to the source of the water and cast in the salt there and said, thus says the Lord, I have healed this water. From it there shall be no more death or barrenness. And so the water remains healed to this day, according to the word of Elisha, which he spoke. And we're speaking today from the subject, from bitterness to blessedness. From bitterness to blessedness. You will go through some situations where you'll need to take some sour situations, the lemons of life. You have to learn to squeeze the lemons, add a little water and a little sugar and make lemonade, and then sell it. You don't get paid unless you sell the stuff that you've been through. Don't go through pain, heartache, and then not profit from it. May I just remind you that God never ever wastes a hurt. Whatever you've been through, there's something that you're supposed to grow from that thing. It ought to make you better. You ought to grow from it. It's not what you go through, it's what you grow through in life. You have to learn how to make lemonade when life has dealt you lemons. You could spend the rest of your life complaining about how sour your situation is, but complaining about your problems doesn't make it any better. I bump into people, I ask them sometimes, how you doing? And they said, well, I can't complain. I said, you could complain, but if you did, it wouldn't help. But I do know people who spend most of their time, their energy and their effort complaining about their problems. Complaining nails you to your problems. And so there's no need to just be crucified and nailed to your problems because you complain about things all of the time. And I want you to notice a situation here in Jericho where the water was bad. It was a pleasant city, but the water was bad. The setting for this particular miracle here is Jericho. Jericho means fragrant. It means fragrant. It was really known as a city of palms. It was located in the plain of Jordan, where there were vast groves of palm trees and many rose gardens there. That's why they called it fragrant. So many rose gardens and wonderful palms. There was just a beautiful, pleasant fragrance that actually came from the city. So hence the name Jericho means fragrant, because so many beautiful things come from it. Did you know that only 10% of flowers have a pleasant fragrance? Only 10%. Most flowers, if you smell it, it's like, oh. But only 10% of the flowers actually have a pleasant fragrance. And so Jericho was one of those cities where it was a parting experience. You know, there was something that happened in Jericho that would take you from one thing to another. But we're called as a people of God to be a fragrance unto him. Prayer comes up to God like a fragrance. Our prayer is like a sweet-smelling incense that comes before God. We are fragrant, but you can be fragrant but barren. And this was the condition here of Jericho. There is always a situation where there is a bitter side to everything that is sweet. There is. I want you to understand that. Don't think it's strange, because there is a bitter side to everything that is sweet. Anytime you find a sweet person, there is a bitter person that's on the inside of them from their old nature. They have to keep it suppressed. You could do some stuff that could make that thing resurrect, but you don't want to resurrect that. You know, there are some people that are just fine until you deal with that certain area. And if you touch on that certain area, boy, you just get, it's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's a bitter side to everything that is sweet. I mean, everything that you get sweetness out of, there had to be a bitter experience that actually produced it. Joy is wonderful, but all true joy is born out of sorrow. You wouldn't know the joy of graduation unless you'd gone through the pain of study and having to go to class every day and having to do homework and having to turn in papers. Until you've gone through that pain, you don't even understand the joy of graduation. Until you have struggled and wondered, am I ever going to get out? Is my child ever going to get out of school? You know, to go through that. And even if they graduate, oh Lordy, you're just glad to get them out. You know, not, you know, cum laude and summa cum laude. It's just, oh Lordy, my child made it out. It's just good to just get out any way you can get out. And so you don't know the joy of graduation until you've gone through the pain. So there's a bitter side to everything that we know is sweet. There's a bitter side to everything that's sweet. If you've got somebody that really knows how to throw down in the kitchen, they can cook really well, and the meal is just wonderful. You go there and you have, you know how they did in the country, they'd get 2 and 3 different kinds of meat, and you had ham, and you had roast beef and fried chicken and baked chicken, all kind of stuff, and sweet potato souffle and macaroni and cheese, and, you know, green beans and red velvet cake, you know, all this kind of stuff, you know. Oh, your mouths are watering now. Some people are just, you know, gumbo and shrimp etouffee and all of that good stuff. You got somebody that really knows how to throw down in the kitchen, and the sweetness of the meal and just being able to eat from a seasoned cook. My God, what a blessing that is. But then there's the bitterness of all of those pots and pans and dishes and plates and stuff that have to be washed afterwards. Trying to wash down grease that has popped everywhere all over the place. You know what I mean? There is a bitter side. You know, once you get all of this stuff, you go there and have a nice, wonderful party, and look at the cleanup. There's always a bitter side to everything that is sweet. People enjoy the wonderful sweetness of having intimate relationships until you get pregnant. And then they go through some of the bitter experiences when they're in the delivery, and they're in transition in delivery, you know, dilating from 7 to 10 centimeters, and things are uncomfortable, and you get nauseated, and you're just really experiencing these bearing contractions on your body. And so there's a bitter side to everything that we know as sweet. Everything. You know, there's a sweet thing of being able to say that, you know, that you're your own boss, you work for yourself, you got your own business. But then there's a bitterness because you got to file taxes. And you got to deal now with, you know, payroll taxes, and you got to deal with insurance issues, and now you got to deal with meeting a payroll every week, and you got to deal with, you know, trying to get insurance for yourself, and you have to go through a whole myriad of other stuff. There's a bitter side to it, and everybody be looking at all the sweet stuff. You look at the sweet and say, oh boy, that's a nice ride there, but they don't tell you about the maintenance bills. When you take this thing in and you got to have some work done on it, and they don't tell you how much it doesn't get but 12 miles to the gallon. You got to try to fill this thing up with premium gas. Oh, I'm just telling you, there's a bitter side to everything that we know as sweet. So think it not strange. There's always something bitter in life that comes on the other side of something that is sweet. There's a price for it. The sweetness is born out of the bitterness. And so each one has the other. So don't think that is anything strange when you deal with something bitter that comes from something sweet, because there's a bitter side to everything that is sweet. The sweetness of success has the counterbalance of the bitterness of sacrifice and labor. And so we have to just understand that goes with the territory. And now, since salt, say salt. Salt has it's purifying in its effect. It is antiseptic in its qualities. It became emblematic of fidelity and friendship among Eastern nations. I don't know whether you realize it, but the Atlantic Ocean has about 79 pounds of salt per ton of water. The Pacific Ocean has about 81 pounds of salt per ton of water. But I've been over to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has 500 pounds of salt per ton of water. Isn't that amazing? 500. You know why? Because everything flows into it and nothing flows out of it. And the salt is concentrated in that place. It is the most buoyant water on the top side of the earth. So when I went there, the bishop had to strip down so that I could get in the Dead Sea. I want to just get in it. You know, there's no life in it. There are no fish in it. You don't have to worry about something brushing up against your leg and wondering, what was that? So I couldn't resist the temptation. I stripped down and I just go and I'm just laying on it like I'm laying on a float. It's the most buoyant water on the top side of the earth. It is loaded with salt. It is antiseptic in its quality and in its nature. When they were in a barren situation, now let me just tell you this, too much salt will make good land barren. And that's why nothing grows in the Dead Sea, because there's too much concentration of salt. We are to have salt in us, but if you get too much salt, it'll make you barren, and nobody wants to be around salty Christians. Touch your neighbor, say, I've met that person. Just as long as you are not that person. But I want you to understand that salt is emblematic in Scripture of covenant between God and His people. It's emblematic between covenant between God and His people. Numbers chapter 18 verse 19 mentions this, that all the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer to the Lord, I have given to you and to your sons and daughters with you as an ordinance forever. It is a covenant of salt. Say, covenant of salt. It's a covenant of salt forever before the Lord, with you and your descendants with you. It's a covenant of salt. And so we have to learn how to have this covenant of salt. Salt has something to do with the healing of bitterness in life. It really does. And so we have to practice speaking with more salt and grace. We have to practice that. You have to make an intentional effort to practice that. Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6 says this, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Seasoned with salt. Let it be with grace, seasoned with salt. You know, how many of you all remember your grandmama's cooking? And how many of you all have problems getting your food to taste like your grandmama's food? You ever notice that? One of the principal reasons is not only in her know-how of the technique that she used to do certain things, and the fact that, you know, she didn't use Betty Crocker. She had her own flour that she sifted. Some of these young women don't even know anything about sifting flour and shelling peas and snapping peas and shucking corn. Y'all don't even just, you think it came out of a bag in the freezer. But one of the real secrets to grandma's cooking is that her pans were seasoned. Yeah, the seasoned pans. She had an old, big old black skillet. My grandma, how many of your grandmamas had a black skillet? You haven't had any fried chicken until you have fried chicken out of a big black skillet. It's got to be seasoned. You got to fry a whole lot of chicken in that thing to get it seasoned right. And then you run out to Target and get you a little black skillet and think you're going to cook up some stuff like grandma was able to cook, and her utensils were seasoned. Her pans were seasoned. You can't just imitate that overnight because you just ran out to the store and got something and then put a little salt and pepper and some, you know, you got some little flour on it, and you think you can cook it up and it's going to taste like your grandmama. No. Grandmama's pans were seasoned. She's done a heap of cooking in that kitchen. She done slung a lot of grease in there. And her pans are seasoned. And so in the same way, it says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt. Seasoned with salt. Now, you have to let what you say be seasoned with salt. You could tell a person, now, you know, you're getting on my nerves. But see, that's just giving it to them raw. And I know that there are some people that they're just going to give it to you straight. That's like, I don't hold any punches. I call an ace and a spade a spade. But you know, they end up offending a lot of people when you're just really direct. There's another way to be able to say that and let your words be seasoned with salt. You know, you don't have to just look at people and just say, you're getting on my nerve. You can just politely say it. Here's the way you season it with grace. I need a little alone time. When you say it like that, you're really saying to them, I'm fed up with you right now. You have gotten on my last nerve, and you need to get out of my face before I hurt you. You just have to be able to just politely say, you know what, I need a little alone time. My mother used to have to tell my daddy, you need a vacation. She would look at him and she would just tell him, you're tired. You're tired. My mother would and she would sometimes just start packing his bags. But her words were always seasoned with grace. Seasoned with, her words were with grace, seasoned with salt. Seasoned with salt. See, grace and salt can disarm without harming. They have the ability to disarm without harming. And whenever you think of being seasoned, you think of being prepared by time. It takes time to be seasoned. In whatever it is that you're doing. You think of seasoning, it means to be matured, it means to be ripe, it means to be developed with full flavor. To be seasoned really means to be rich with experience, which yields wisdom. It means to be rich with experience, which yields wisdom. It yields wisdom. So now if you go back and reread Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6 with wisdom in mind, let's read it that way. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with wisdom, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Does that make sense to you now? It ought to be seasoned with wisdom. There are certain things that your wisdom will tell you, this is not the time to say that, or this is not the place to say that. So you have to be able to say certain things with wisdom. Sometimes the greatest wisdom is simply knowing what you ought to ignore. You don't have to respond to everything. You have to learn in wisdom to choose the battles that matter. There are certain things, don't even dignify it with a response. Don't get your blood pressure raised over that. Choose your battles. Learn to choose your battles. Sometimes your best seasoning with grace is that I am not going to dignify that with a response, but just say that on the inside. Say that on the inside. And so it reminds me of the words of Dorothy Neville that are so important, that said the real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. And I know a whole lot of people who need to learn the art of leaving the wrong thing unsaid at the tempting moment. That is such a good quote that it ought to go in the scriptures. I would love to put it right behind Colossians 4:6. It ought to be Colossians 4:7. And we ought to say the real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. What a great statement. You know, that to me, that tells me that came out of a seasoned woman. That came out of a woman that learned how to bridle herself. You have to learn how to control yourself. Listen, ladies, don't say everything you want to say to your husband. I know you want to say a whole lot of stuff. Now, a wise woman builds her house. A foolish woman tears it down with her tongue. With her tongue. You can tear a man's self-esteem down with your tongue. You can emasculate him with your tongue. Your tongue is worse than a scalpel from a surgeon. Now, I know some men now, too. My God, some poor women are like animals that have been abused in a shelter. You know, and so we have to be able to love one another. And let me just tell you this, that from these kinds of experiences, the way that people talk to each other, guess what? Bitterness can set up in their hearts just from the way that they talk to each other. Did you know your words have power? Touch yourself, say, my words have power. An anonymous author said these words. He said, a careless word may kindle strife. A cruel word may wreck a life. A bitter word may hate instill. A brutal word may spite and kill. A gracious word may smooth the way. And a joyous word may light the day. A timely word may lessen stress. A loving word may heal and bless. When you use the right words, your words have the ability to build up or to tear down. And I want you to notice something in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 and 15. It says, pursue peace with all people. Now notice that, pursue it, go after it. Just like you'd go after houses and cars and raises and new jobs. Pursue it. Pursue peace with all people. It didn't say to pursue a 3-car garage. It didn't say pursue the next sport car that's convertible. Pursue peace with all people. Pursue peace. You don't know how valuable peace is in your home and in your heart until you don't have any. I'm telling you, I would rather be in a 1-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom, with 1 light bulb, and have peace with somebody that I love than to be in a 7-bedroom mansion with 8 different bathrooms and 2 separate kitchens and dens and all of that, in a theater and all of this kind of stuff, and an in-home gym. Just give me a place and let me have peace. It says pursue peace with all people. It didn't say pursue somebody that was fine, because sometimes those fine folks will mess with your peace. It says pursue peace with all people. And notice this, it's in the Bible, it's in your Bible. Pursue peace with all people and holiness. Ooh. Did you know that you're supposed to pursue holiness? That's in the Bible. I know you thought that went out with the early apostles. But holiness is still God's idea. It is the nature of God. God is a holy God. And a holy God really desires to have holy people. It says that you have to pursue it. Go after it with all of your heart. You pursue peace with all people and pursue holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. No one will see the Lord. No one will see the Lord. Listen, if you're not a saint when you die, you certainly won't be one after you die. I know some folks that are so crooked that they're going to have to be screwed in the ground when they die. Touch your neighbor, say, I know that person too. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Now notice verse 15, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. If you ever have somebody who gets a root of bitterness in them, that thing starts springing up and causing trouble. And then notice it says, and by this many become defiled, because bitter root in the heart, whenever there's a live bitter root, there's going to be bitter fruit that comes from it. And they serve the bitter fruit from the bitter root to many people, and they defile them, because their bitterness starts poisoning their friends, and it starts poisoning other folks, because you got a problem, because you're negative and you've had bad experiences in your heart and don't know how to forgive and let go, and you become bitter, and then you begin to poison and contaminate everybody around you. A bitter mother will raise bitter children. It's interesting. A bitter father will raise bitter children. He'll have a bitter wife, and then he'll wonder what in the world. It's because he's defiled other folks with his own bitterness that came out of his own heart, because he had a hard time. And he assumed that because he had a hard time, that something was wrong with him. The life was not fair. Some people act like they give God 3 chances. It's just 3 chances. I'm so glad that Joseph didn't just give God 3 chances. Joseph's brothers turned on him, plotted to kill him. Then they put him in a pit, and then they sold him into slavery. Then he got down in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife lied on him, wound him up in jail. 3 strikes, you out, God. I tried that God stuff, my life went downhill. You don't do 3 strikes and you out with God. What? Who in the name? What? Who told you that? Now, if the Bible says, you go read your book in the book of Proverbs, a righteous man falls how many times? 7 times. 7 times, and he rises up again. How dare dare we give God 3 times? 3 times. You know, Lord, you let somebody, they broke my heart, and I was trusting them. And Lord, you should have let me know. And you want to blame God because you pursued something in your own lust that was immature, and you didn't even know how to have enough maturity and enough wisdom to even be able to judge that character. Now you want to blame God. Oh, my. And it's like, somebody hurt my heart, let's strike one God, and then your finances jack up on you. You end up having something repossessed and your credit messed up, or filing bankruptcy. So strike 2 God. And I'm supposed to be a Christian. I go to church every week, and my relationship fell apart, and everything. I'm trying to serve the Lord. I'm trying to pay my tithes and everything. My money all backed up on. Strike 2 God. He's not trying to compete to get in the World Series with you. He's not running for office. He's already elected. He's King of kings and Lord of lords, whether you like it or not. Whether it's not based on your experiences in your life and how many misfortunes that you've had. It's not about how many times that you've had a stroke of bad luck and demons have attacked you and all of this kind of stuff. And just because a relationship jacked up on you, and then you're bitter over that, and then your finances messed up on you and you're bitter over that, and now your health breaks down. All of that stuff is connected anyway. You get enough people, heartache, all of this stuff really comes from human beings. I'm just telling you, a human being can run your blood pressure up faster than a piece of pork. You just take that from me. I mean, for real. And more folks are in the cemetery right now because of... You'll figure it out. Touch your neighbor, say, I ain't gonna let them worry me. Don't let people give you a stroke and a heart attack and run your blood pressure up and got your sugar levels out of balance and everything. Listen, it's not what you eating, it's what's eating you. It's what's eating you. The reason you eating that junk is because somebody got you stressed out. You trying to eat the wrong junk to make you feel good to get over this stuff that this joker done put. That's the only reason now that you got all of this high cholesterol. You've been eating enough banana splits and cheesecake trying to get over your trouble. You're trying to lift your spirit. That's why you got a chocolate fix. But we don't give God 3 strikes and you're out. I mean, if a righteous man can fall 7 times and rise again, why would we count God out just because we've had 3 bad experiences? And we have made, that's a fallacy in logic. It is a fallacy. It's fallacious thinking to give God 3 times because some stuff jacked up in your life.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power.